Hey guys, this is Pablo with Meditation Amsterdam. And so based on yesterday's video, I decided to try and film these clips while there's still natural light outside, because it turned out to be really dark and grainy and poor quality. I hope this works out better. And so I'm here at the high-tech campus in Eindhoven, where I work a couple of days a week. There's some very cool little pond going on and trees. And so what I wanted to talk about in today's video was about a phrase that I read from a poet called Rumi. And for those of you who know Rumi, or who don't know Rumi, he was a Sufi poet. And so Sufism is what you could call the mystical side of Islam. So as opposed to being very doctrinal or being very, I don't know, based on superstition or scriptures, it is more about really the mystical experience. And what we see in several of the formalized religions, same as Christianity, for example, is that there were always people within those formal religions, especially at the start, who were really in touch with the mystical side of things and the mystical experience, as opposed to just, let's say, focusing on belief or focusing on doctrine and scriptures and or even group mentality, but they were really focused on the mystical experience, which is by definition a personal internal experience. And so and so Rumi has very beautiful poetry, and there is one phrase that I read about Rumi, which says that beyond any ideas of right doing or wrongdoing, there is a field, and then Rumi says, "I'll meet you there," and I found that to be a very interesting phrase, very inspirational. And part of the reason that I find it interesting is because I think that I start to understand what he meant, and so you see, when you start to embody mysticism or the deep experiential side of things like yoga, tai chi, or meditation, some of the scriptures or some of the books that you might have read at some point start to take on a very different meaning. One example of that is that there were entire passages from yogic books which I had read in the past that talked about chakras and the energy body, which I was totally not interested in and didn't really believe. I didn't grant them any credence whatsoever, because why would you if you're a rational person? There's no reason to grant any supernatural stories any credence, if you want to call them supernatural. But once you've experienced some of these things, once you have felt the energy body, once you have started to feel and become familiar with things like the chakras, then you can go back and revisit some of that and understand it on a much more interesting level. And so I wanted to unpack that phrase from Rumi. I think it's a very helpful phrase to understand what we mean when we talk about awareness, mindfulness, and meditation, but also yoga in general, or internal discipline in general, if you will. So what Rumi is talking about when he says that there's a field beyond ideas of right doing and wrongdoing is he's talking about this separation between pure perception, if you will, pure sensory perception, and perception of the self versus perception of, or rather the application of the judgmental, logical, critical, rational mind. Okay, and that mind, that rational mind that I'm talking about, is a mind that is, according to the standards, if you will, of Eastern tradition, has become massively overactive in the West, in the Western mind, or in the modern mind, because the West has kind of taken over. The consumer mentality and the logic of the West has sort of taken over the world in a sense. And so, so what's happening is, if you think about it, or rather, if you try to understand it from a neurological level, there is a part of your brain that is called the default network, and its sole job is to project itself into the past and the future, and assess things on a logical level. And it is constantly preoccupied with did I screw that up, or why did that happen, and then analyzing things in the past, or projecting itself into the future and trying to sort out scenarios from one another. So trying to assess and dissect and find the optimal solution. And it's almost like a problem/solution generator. It's actually more of a problem generator, if we're honest. So it's constantly trying to find fault, or say, yeah, this is good enough, right? So now something has been declared either good or bad. Now, this is not inherently wrong. You need that in order to navigate the world. You need that in order to survive. You need that logical mind. But the point about this is that you need it as a tool. So you need to be able to pick up that logical mind and say, okay, here's a problem, help me assess it. Let's dissect it. Let's figure out the different aspects of it, and try to decide where we stand on the whole thing. Now, the problem, of course, is when it becomes overactive, and this part of the mind is, in a sense, this thinker, this logical, critical thinker, is a major part, if not the entire part of the brain that constitutes the ego mind, the big villain in the story, right? Now, once again, the ego mind is not by definition evil. It's just that when you're not using it in order to navigate the world, but it is using you to color your entire reality, now you have a problem on your hands. And that is because, as we've said in the past, you don't become fulfilled by logically solving every problem in your life. It doesn't work that way. The way to become fulfilled is to enter the field that Rumi is talking about, the field that is beyond assessments of right and wrong. So this is why in many of the Eastern books and literature, they keep coming back to this idea of being non-judgmental, or stop distinguishing between right and wrong. And again, it is not so that you don't you become unable to condemn something that is not right. It's more about, are you caught in that mode, or are you able to step back from it? Is that ability to go back and forth that we're really talking about. So that if you talk to who was it that wrote this? I think it was Shinzen Young in The Science of Enlightenment. Yeah, that was it. So that's his book. And he talks about how this Zen master said to him a very, very cryptic phrase. He said, Jesus Christ was died and then went to heaven, but I prefer to go to hell. And Shinzen really struggled with what this meant. And what he eventually realized is that enlightenment didn't mean being free from the ego, or stop judgment altogether, but the ability to navigate and move your mind from using its judgment capacities to using its perceptual capacities. And so the field that Rumi is talking about is the field of pure perception. And as I film this video right now, I'm actually applying that myself. So I try not to be caught in my head thinking about what I'm going to say next and so on, but instead I'm just sharing with you. And at the same time, I'm in this little field, and I'm perceiving the trees and the sharpness of them. There's a certain temperature to the atmosphere, and there's a certain smell. And as I perceive it purely for what it is, without passing judgment on it, then I've entered the field that Rumi is talking about. It is a field of non-judgment, as opposed to a field where I'm trying to judge and assess, why is this so damp, or is this the perfect temperature to be doing a video, or things of that kind. So I suppose I'll leave you with that. I think this is a topic that I'll try to revisit at some point. I think that the field that Rumi is talking about is the most beautiful experience that we can, or one of the most beautiful experiences that we can have, because when we enter it, we funny enough see things as if for the first time. So for example, looking at your own hands, which is something that you don't do very often, at least not without thinking, can be fascinating experience, and the same goes for everything else around you. Every sound, every smell can be completely new and absolutely fascinating if you are truly with it, as opposed to thinking about it. So the field of Rumi is a field of pure perception, is a field of pure here and now. And I invite you to try and walk into it as often as you can, and find a lot of fascination in the simple things of daily life. And with that, I'll leave you to it. And thanks for watching. Cheers.